Well, let me tell you what, brother. We're coming into this Reclaiming Man podcast.
Golly. Oh man, I lost half that audio somehow.
I hope it comes through on the final recording.
Yeah.
I just realized I didn't do that live. Damn it. Oh well.
I recorded. Yeah.
Well,
Or-
like my little music thing over here, it's in preview, not on live, so I don't think it went to the recording.
Oh, that's exactly what happened. Yeah. Were you trying to apply some effect or something?
Well, yeah. I was trying.
Yeah,
You couldn't hear the music?
No. Yeah, that's
Do
what.
you want me to try
You're right.
again?
It's all right. I can add some music to it. That's the usual MO.
Yeah, I might.
Oh, he's drinking some beer, so he's going to do some burping, I can tell you what.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Welcome to episode 7 of the Reclaiming Man podcast. I am your host, Scott Sylvie, and with me, as always, we have Preston, the Southern Canuck Groundsty, rocking
Hey.
out the WrestleMania t-shirt.
I wish I had a burp chambered. I would have just let one go. That would have been a good intro. Especially given the context of tonight's shenanigans.
And co-hosted by Michael, the Mastermind Beckwith.
That's right. That is right.
Gentlemen, thank you for being here tonight. How are we doing?
Absolutely fantastic.
Highlight of the week. Highlight of the week.
Highlight of the week.
You know, Michael, I noticed your beard is gone. I know we're probably 2 or 3 episodes into you.
This is really a
losing your beard.
tragic. Yeah.
But I'm also noticing now that you have a hat on tonight, I'm noticing some long hair in the background, and I'm thinking, I think you should grow your hair
Ooh,
long
yes.
and grow a beard. And let's
Well-
just see what that ends up looking like.
I think he should get the Southern mullet,
Oh, dude.
right?
With a beard, with his, because your beard's kind of red, is it not, Michael? Little.
It gets a little bit red.
I think you should go for that Morgan Wallen vibe.
Oh,
Oh.
yeah.
And then you'd be like a transplant Tennessean, just like we are, even though
Yeah.
we live in the city.
It's definitely a different vibe. That's for sure.
I mean, I'm digging it. I love it. I think you look good both ways. So,
Well, the way that I see it on my screen, you've got no beard, medium beard, epic beard. So we're representing.
All right. So today we are episode 7. As of our recording, we launched 4 days ago, 5 days ago.
as of
And
when this is released, we launched.
that'll be a different story.
well,
yeah,
who knows?
when-
We
when
might
this is
release it
recorded.
tomorrow.
Yeah. I mean, it might just be gold, right? We can't hold it back from the people. I've had a few people say, hey, I love the pod. Love the first few episodes. And they were inquiring about how do women fit into Reclaiming Man? And I thought that would be an interesting thing for us to discuss.
Interesting.
It's an interesting topic because,
Yeah.
especially in modern society, right?
Mhm.
And if you know Preston, Michael, and I, we are extremely strong family men. We believe very much in, collectively we have 8 kids and 4 of those are girls. Well, one of
Mhm.
them is a woman now, crying out loud.
Right.
And then we have 3 strong, fierce women backing us in all things. And so it's an interesting perspective to create a podcast that's only for men or that's designed for men. So I would just love to chat about that for a few minutes and give the people what they want.
So, Reclaiming Man is a podcast about men, for men, how to help men grow. We are trying to build men up. But in that process, we are not at all trying to step on women. I think that sometimes can be a misconception with podcasts that are male driven or podcasts about men where we're talking about men topics. And there's, I don't know what you call it, the feminist movement. I'm not quite sure. Don't know much about that, but we are not at all about bringing down women. In fact, women are a major part of our, like you mentioned earlier, Scott, our families, our wives and us, and we're 50-50. There's things that my wife does in our relationship that, I mean, if I had to do it, if she died and passed away, like I would rise to the occasion, but like we contribute to the marriage equally in very different ways. And, it's not necessarily evenly split always across the board, but when it comes down to the end of it, it's like we are a team together. So while Reclaiming Man, our goal is to bring men up in society so that, because we feel that there is a lack of manliness, I guess, in society. What is the term I'm looking for? If you guys can think of it.
Masculinity.
Well, masculinity, but just there's a lack of appreciation, I believe, for what men do and what men are designed to do in society right now. We're not trying to step on women while we do that. So that's point number one.
Yeah, I think in the first episode, Scott, you talked about how it's less about being anti-woman than it is about being pro-man. And I think that encapsulates it pretty well, in that we all recognize that without sadness, happiness really wouldn't be. And without women, men also wouldn't be. I look at the modern view of men and women and equality, this idea that there are equalities between men and women in many ways, but there are also a lot of differences. And I think one of the things that we're trying to talk about is some of the key things that are different about men and women, and how as men, there are certain qualities that we have stopped pursuing because it sets us apart. And those aren't always bad things to pursue. And that there are fundamental anatomical differences between men and women. Philosophically, men and women can do a lot of the same things in life, in jobs and careers. And there are also a lot of things that they do differently and think about the world differently and experience the world differently. And it's the fundamental difference between, in my opinion, as a man, I am never going to have close women friends in life, apart from my wife. Yes, I will be acquainted with my friends' wives, but I'm never going to look at them as like my friend, somebody who I'm going to confide in. I'm not going to share personal things that I'm struggling with necessarily with my best friend's wives. I want to share those things with my wife, and I'm going to share those with other men.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a huge difference, in my opinion, between surrounding yourself with a small group of men, the tribe that we're talking about forming. It really isn't talking about a tribe of both men and women. It's surrounding yourself with other men who are going through things like you are. And it is a little bit exclusive in that regard, which I know it's hard to accept in today's modern society, but it's not exclusive from a negative perspective. It's a positive thing to say that men and women struggle with different things from a identity perspective, from a stereotype perspective, right? Behind every successful man, there is, in many cases, a successful woman as well. And maybe you could say, instead of behind every successful man, you could say at the side of every man as a successful woman, if you want to be a bit more accurate about it, because it's a team, especially when it comes to family and parenting and in life. And that's where I would at least start part of the conversation.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that you guys have said. I mean, I know I do because we have kind of built the ethos of this brand, but this concept. And I think, Preston, you said something I thought was on point, that being pro-man does not make you anti-woman.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can be pro-man and pro-women and pro-both. But ultimately, I'm not a woman, and I don't pretend to know how to frame the things that I've gone through in my life and I'm going through now in the context of a woman. Does that mean that I think a woman won't get benefit from Reclaiming Man? No, I think there's a lot of things we've talked about to date, whether it's friendships, habits, growth mindset, etc., that are very much applicable to both. Part of what we identified as a need in our lives as a group of men was that those strong relationships, that brotherhood with other men, it didn't exist in our lives. And it doesn't exist for a lot of men. I know we've all talked to lots and lots of men in our lives who feel the same way. And we touched on this previously. Hey, Brian Fleming, if you're listening, you've been my best friend since I was 17. But we also have lived many states away for most of that time, and we had kids and things got busy. And I still love that man like a brother. And if he called me and said, I need you tomorrow, I would be, or if I need you now, I would be on the very next plane. And that will unquestionably be how it is until I die. But as we all know, life happens. People grow apart. They don't have the same, their friendships. Our friendship, me and Brian, it was based largely around shared interests, whether it's, actual activities, playing sports together, watching sports, playing video games, etc. And I imagine if we spent a lot of time together, we would still find lots of things to bond over. But, as we went different directions physically, geographically in the world, and just the timing of kids and families and all that, we just grew apart. And in some ways, I'm saddened by that. But I also just know it's a fact of life. But you fast forward 10 years from when we hung out on a regular basis, and there was a big period of time in my life where I didn't have really close friends outside of my family, outside of my wife. So I would echo all of that and simply say that from my perspective, what we talk about and what we're striving for is to become the very best versions of ourselves. And I think all of us would say that the very best version of ourselves includes having wonderful relationships with women. It's being a great husband, being a great father. All of us have daughters, and raising our daughters to be strong, fiercely independent women.
Mhm.
So that this is not a podcast about what some people might term toxic masculinity. I'm sure we'll talk about that more as we move into the future. It's a podcast about being a good man and being good at being a man. And
Positive masculinity, could you say? I mean,
there are a lot of women who, even since we released our podcast, we've seen, all of us have seen many pieces of feedback from women saying, yes, we need more strong men in our lives.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean that we need douchebag men who try to suppress women. That's the opposite of a good man. We're focusing on building up men, helping men navigate the struggles of modern society. And I know it's a popular narrative to say, oh, men, especially with 3 white men on this podcast, oh, white men have it easy. And I will grant that white men may have it relatively easier than men of other creed, color, et cetera, but where that narrative misses the mark is it completely invalidates the struggles that men do have of any race.
All men have.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so we're not attempting to fight that battle. What we're attempting to do is to help men of all kinds to become better at being men. And so from that perspective, I guess that's, to your point, Michael, my initial kind of salvo would be, or my response.
Yeah, I think the thing that stands out to me there, you mentioned that there have been women that have listened to this podcast, and most women know men, and most women know men that could stand to go through some measure of recalibration and reconsideration of who they are, who they want to be,
Mhm.
and what their role is in society, whether that's in the context of family, or a relationship with their spouse, or professionally or personally, all these different roles that men have in life. Arguably, women are equally aware of, in many cases, how often we fall short. And the interesting commentary that I often find myself hearing is, why are men such dogs? And there's a truth behind it, because a lot of us have made decisions that have put us in a place of lowering our worth to society. We have made choices that have lowered our status in the eyes of women. And so a lot of what we're talking about here is reclaiming the status of a leader in the family, a leader in our own lives, certainly, a leader in a relationship, And it doesn't have to be a leader in the sense of superiority, but as an example, as a model for how we should treat people, how we should treat women specifically is a great part of it. And that's where, not just being good at being a husband or being good at being a father, but being good at a man, it is something that's specifically relevant to other men. And that's the target audience. Absolutely. It's just that I think there's a lot of value. How many single moms are there out there who are interested in helping their sons become good men? And how many mothers would want their sons to grow up as a man who demonstrates the qualities and the morals and the view on life that is something that's admirable and an example, and finding an identity that allows them to be fulfilled and happy. I mean, that's a lot of the stuff that we're talking about. So I can see where there is some interest from women in our podcast, but generally we're going to be speaking to men, and hopefully some of the content that we share, some of the stories that we share, some of the struggles that we share are things that can be appreciated, at least from both perspectives.
I agree. And I think to expand on that, some of the things that we focus on in just our 3-person conversations that we have every day is the role of men in modern society. And I know we've talked about this in the past, that I think it's a huge hat tip to our ancestors for evolving and developing a society in such a way that we don't need to risk our lives to go hunt boar or to fight with the neighboring tribe. But part of what the 3 of us are trying to do, as I think all men are in America, is figure out how to navigate society in a way that is both productive to society while also being true to our inner instincts that developed over thousands of generations. And so how do we strike that balance in a way that fulfills us? And this is where, if somebody wants to start a Reclaiming Woman podcast to work through the challenges that women face in modern society, like, high five, let's go. I'm not a woman. I don't know what those challenges are. And I don't pretend, like, you talk about toxic masculinity and mansplaining. Like, if I'm going to sit here and talk about female challenges in modern society, like, okay, punch me in the face and tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about. I agree.
Right.
And who's to say that your wife and my wife don't start a Reclaiming Woman podcast? That could very easily happen. And maybe they should. But that's the whole point, is that, we're living our life in the lens of a man, a father and a husband and all that. So we are not trying to live a woman's life. I mean, there are some men that are doing that in today's day and age, and, they're winning medals in swimming, but, we're not about that. So.
Yeah. And if I had to boil it down, how I look at it, when we were talking about historically, generationally, the role of man has switched, many of us don't have the skills to protect our families, for instance. And I don't think there is a single woman out there who doesn't want to feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about your children, are there any of your children out there who don't want to feel safe? And the answer is no. And maybe they have, as women, some other skills that help them feel more safe. But the reality is, we as men need to step up. We need to gain those skills. If our world is devolving into more chaos and more crisis, more school shootings, more opportunities, higher level of risk of things that are out of our control, unless we are actively pursuing skills that allow us to protect our family, to protect our own, to protect our tribe, we are not, in my opinion, living up to the expectation of what a man should be. And so there's that, I think, core component of Reclaiming Man as well, where we looked at our forefathers who fought for our freedom and said, there is a gap. in modern day man, in modern masculinity, that isn't including some of those core skills. And so there's that element that's really important to discuss as well. And we're hoping that this podcast really will inspire men to go after those types of skills. I think that's why, as a group, collectively, we've talked about fieldcraft survival and some of these other things that society might scoff at, because we have, a multi-billion-dollar defense budget. But what about protection from our own country and protection from
just bad
the
guys
world
in general, right?
Yeah.
I think as a man in society and a man who grew up in, a media-centric or in some ways media-driven society, I'd like to think that if I was out and about, just living my normal life, and I happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time, that I would step up and defend my family. But I think the reality is, for almost every man in America, let's just say a majority, if we got punched in the face, we wouldn't know what to do. Our first reaction would not be to punch back. Our reaction would be
shock.
I think that's a pretty accurate statement.
Yeah.
And sadly, we've lost a lot of the shock, and we've become desensitized to things that are happening because we see them in the news more consistently. And in the back of our head, we're like, well, there's no way that could happen to us, right? There's no way that could happen to me. But I think that's wishful thinking. And it doesn't matter where you live. I think you can separate yourself from it and isolate. That's one approach. You can go to some places in our country where there's a lot more space. And I think that's a fair approach in many regards. But the reality is most of us live in a place where population density and statistics are against us. And so that's one piece of it where, again, this isn't about being exclusive from a negative sense. It's about defining that role and saying, as men, we should step up and be able to protect not only our families and our tribes, but like the community as well. And do I ever want to be in the position where I have to draw and fire and potentially kill somebody? No. But the reality is, if it's a choice between my family or my friends and somebody who is deranged, delusional, and has a gun out and is threatening the lives of those that I care about, there will be no hesitation. And
I
that's
think that
where we want to
point,
get.
right, is I would like to say there would be no hesitation, but unless you're actively training in those types of activities, it's hard to say how you'll respond.
True. No, yeah. And truthfully, I don't have that training, but that's where these are the ideals that we're going after,
Right.
is having true bravery and courage,
Right.
and overcoming our fears and overcoming what we perceive as limitations.
There's an element too about modern society. You took a fieldcraft class, Scott, a while back, where they'd put you in situations where you were at a gas station.
Yeah.
Kids in the car, guy approaches, and, depending on what you do, as far as the litigious side, like, even while defending your family, you can go to jail, or you get,
There's
so
a
like,
very
there's an
fine
element
line between self-defense and prison.
And so there's going to be, like you mentioned, Michael, like I would defend my family, but in that moment I would think like, do I want to go to jail? And then I'm just not there either way.
Yeah,
So
I think
just, there's so many...
it is a hard decision, but I want to get to the point, and I want other men to get to the point where we have honor to make the right decision and say, my life for theirs, I'm willing to sacrifice and lay down my life for my family. And that is a hard place to get to, but it's something that I've thought about more than I care to admit. But if I were in that situation, I would choose to be improperly litigated against and determined convicted of a crime and give my family a chance to live the rest of their lives.
So I mean, we're not sponsored by Fieldcraft Survival yet, but this is, what that personal defense course is designed to teach you is not necessarily right and wrong. It's to get you to think about these scenarios and these situations so that should you find yourself in it, you're not just reacting,
Yeah.
right? And I bring this back to the general topic. When we talk about reclaiming man, one of my favorite quotes is this idea that we're sleepwalking towards extinction. And that's how many of us are in society. And that means that we're not taking control of our lives and taking agency and ownership over our lives. Instead, we're just at effect of however the winds are blowing, we're just flapping in the breeze.
Yeah.
And I think what reclaiming man really is reclaiming that control and saying, I'm going to be the owner of the writer of my story, right? I'm going to be the person who dictates how my life is lived. And in parallel with that, or augmenting that, is that I'm going to be an amazing human and I'm going to be the best man that I can be. And when it comes to things like defense, it covers everything. We need to be, our options are to scroll Instagram for hours or binge watch Netflix, right? That's one side of the spectrum. And then the other side is to focus on how we can get better in all areas of our life and just incrementally improve our lives and build better relationships with our families, our friends, other men, to ultimately reclaim our identity and reclaim ourselves.
Yeah. And I think you're highlighting a good point that helps transition away purely from the safety component of being a man and the differences and nuances between men and women. I think there are a couple other key pieces that are missing in many cases with the role of man in modern society. And that's to what extent are we seeing the value in the role of woman in society accurately and not applying stereotypes? Because I think apart from wanting to be safe, women want to be seen and they want to be understood. And the other pieces that we're covering in Reclaiming Man are helping us as men better understand ourselves, the conversations about identity, about our vision for the future. The more that we understand ourselves, the better we can fit into the relationship of and the role of the identity of a husband and a father. And so I think it should enable us to better see the value and worth of our wives and how important they are in our lives and why we should not be making so many selfish decisions. Because coming back to it, there's a reason why many women say men are pigs or men are dogs, because we've put ourselves in that position. We've made collective decisions as men that we need to depart from. And we need to wake up from the sleepwalk that you're talking about, Scott. We have to own up to and take accountability for the flaws that we've had and start to replace some of those flaws as men with things that are strength.
It's just flaws as humans, right? And the difference is we're three men. So those flaws, especially the common ones, but just in general, we're looking at it through the lens of a man, a husband, a father. And so I think my closing thoughts perhaps are, in society, we don't have the idea of strong male relationships is not as encouraged as it should be. I'm choosing to focus on promoting healthy and strong relationships between men. And I feel like I can do that while also recognizing the valuable contributions of women in society. But this podcast is speaking to men who are struggling to find those relationships with other men. And being a good man is often what's required to have a good relationship with a woman.
Mm-hmm.
But as we talked about in episode 1, being good at being a man is how men measure one another. And that is a distinction that has nothing to do with women, and not in a bad way. It's just, that is how, just like women will look at another woman and they'll look at each other and they'll make certain judgments or certain decisions about that. Men do the same thing. There's a pecking order in any social structure, right? There's a pecking order, there's a feeling out period. And I think there's certainly a place in society for men and women to have this conversation together. And I think there's a place in the society for women to have this conversation with women. And I think there's a place in society for men to have this conversation with men. And what I would say is, echoing what I said earlier, that there are aspects of being a man in modern society that are imperfect from a societal standpoint. And there are struggles that men have. And that's not to say that our struggles are harder or more. I mean, certainly when we get a cold, it's way worse for us than it is for our wives. But there are struggles that we will face in society. And I think part of what we're trying to do is to navigate that and to understand, where we fit within that context and what we can do as men to not only be better men for everyone around us, but to be better at being a man, which is something that typically is reserved for relationships between men.
I would say, can I get a hallelujah?
Yeah.
You're 100% right. The three of us, this whole thing started, the three of us in a little group, bringing each other up. And our goal
Exactly.
is to do that. We're here to learn. We're here to grow in front of other men and teach them along the way. And you guys reach out to us on our Instagrams and our Facebooks and our YouTubes so that we can all connect and grow together and learn together and rise up, not against women, but so that we are bigger, better, stronger men for our women.
Yeah, higher standards. You said bring each other up. And the tendency has been for, as men in groups, to go to the lowest common denominator and accept that many thought patterns and many behaviors are acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
And it's contributed to society's negative vision of masculinity and what a man is. And it's time for us to put a stake in the ground and say, we are going to live by higher standards. And the way that we're going to do that is by surrounding ourselves with minimally a couple of other men who have the same desires to start living by those higher standards.
Yeah. And ultimately, that is a perfect summation that this is, very simply put, this is a podcast about lifting up ourselves and the other men in our lives that we are close with and establishing those strong bonds of brotherhood and using that brotherhood as a forcing function and an accountability function to continuously improve and get better.
Yes, sir.
Parting thoughts?
That was it, man. That was the party thought. That was great.
That was the parting thought.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen. Well, that's a wrap for episode 7 of the Reclaiming Man podcast. As always, you can find us on reclaimingman.com. Sign up for a newsletter to get exclusive access to content, offers, deals, exciting news and information. We've got some really exciting, actually, things planned in the coming months. And the first place to hear about that will be at our newsletter.
Got the merch on there as well.
Ooh, we're teasing a merch drop. Merch coming soon. All right. Find us on TikTok and Instagram at Reclaiming Man, YouTube, Reclaiming Man. Find us on Facebook with the Reclaiming Man Facebook group. And with that, episode 7 in the books.
Thanks, Tribe.
Happy Friday.
Thanks, Tribe.
Thanks,
Have a
Tribe.
good weekend.
Until next week.